Welcome to the TLGS 2022 conference. My name is Wendy Doucette from East Tennessee State University. I will be collecting questions in the chat for this session, which is called Beyond the Ivory Tower, Supporting the Graduate Non-Academic Career Search Through Library Partnerships.
Thanks so much, Wendy. My name is Sarah Lane, and I am the business librarian at the Management Library of Cornell University. So I'll talk a little bit more about our library in just a bit, but more about me. I started in this position in June of last year. And previous to that, I was the liaison to the School of Business and Liberal Arts at an institution that was only baccalaureate level, so just bachelor's and associate's degree granting. And so I'm fairly new to working with graduate students. To give you an idea of how this presentation will progress, it's going to be about my work with our Careers Beyond Academia office here at Cornell, which exists to support the non-academic career needs of PhDs and postdocs. So they're not interested in pursuing a tenure track faculty position. So I'm going to be sharing some insights from my experience partnering with career services, and then also some information about how I've adapted my business research library instruction to non-business students. So we'll begin with a little bit of background about the Management Library and about the Careers Beyond Academia office to give you all some context. And then I'll talk a bit about the benefits of creating a partnership with career services and some insights and tips I have about those types of partnerships. Then we'll speak a little bit about the workshops that I offered to Careers Beyond Academia students and describe a little bit more about the content I presented. And then I'll wrap it up with some insights I have about working with non-business students and providing this type of research support. So we'll begin with our background about the Management Library. So we are located in Sage Hall, the beautiful building in this picture, home of Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management. So we're housed right in the graduate business programs. And we primarily serve MBAs and business PhDs. And we have a variety of MBA programs. So some of those are full-time residential programs, both 2- and 1-year programs. And we also have students that primarily learn remotely through our executive part-time MBA programs. And some of those are located downstate in New York City. And then some of those students are spread across the country and in Canada as well. And so we really try to take a blended approach to our reference services at the Management Library because of the students we serve. So most of our students that are incoming into our MBA programs have a minimum of 5 years of experience in industry, and they'll just be with us for, up to 2 years, and then they'll be re-entering the workforce again. And so many of them are used to getting their information in a corporate or consultant style approach where instead of teaching them to fish, they're just getting the fish. And so sometimes it's most appropriate for us to handle the reference questions that way. And then sometimes we do take that information literacy approach where we are teaching them how to fish and saying, it sounds like this is a market research question and this is how you approach market research, and kind of trying to build in some instruction as well. And so, depending on the situation, we do kind of adapt our reference services to those different needs. But we currently provide research support to our MBAs in a few different ways. The first one is workshops. And so sometimes those workshops are offered independently by the library to the business students. And sometimes those are in partnership with our Graduate Career Management Center. So for example, over about a few months ago in December, right before finals week started, the Career Management Center had a 1-hour-long workshop encouraging our executive MBA students to take advantage of the 1 month that they had off during winter break and, don't backslide, but instead be proactive and keep doing your career research. And so they allowed me to present for 20 minutes of that 1-hour-long workshop and offer some research support and give them some ideas about how they could continue their career research. And so that would be an example of one of our partnered workshops we did. We also support students at career fairs. So many of our students over the summer and early fall are attending career fairs like the National Black MBA Association or RAMBA, which is Reaching Out MBAs. And as a part of those conferences, they have career fairs where they may be offered an informational interview that very same day or the next day. And so pre-pandemic, we were attending those conferences in person so we could offer real timely support for those students. And during the pandemic, we were doing that in sort of Zoom rooms. And so that's kind of an example of when we do that sort of handing the fish style reference support, where, you know, they have a limited amount of time to do this career research and we're providing them that information right away. Sometimes we're also invited to present at club meetings. And then, as of course, we also do these one-on-one consultations if a student contacts us and lets us know they need help with their career research. So Careers Beyond Academia, I want to talk a little bit more about that office now. That is an office located within the Graduate School of Cornell. And so it actually began with an NIH grant about 10 years ago to help improve non-academic career outcomes for biomedical students. And since then, they've expanded their clientele and their reach, and now they serve all of Cornell's graduate community with the support of the Office of the Provost. And when I entered this role, this partnership was already existing, and historically, that took the form of a library LibGuide. And so Careers Beyond Academia, their career advisors also had editing privileges for this LibGuide. And so some of the information was really library resource focused, and some of it was really geared more towards what Careers Beyond Academia was offering their students. And in addition, the Careers Beyond Academia office would refer students to the person in my position for one-on-one consultations. And so when I entered this role, I continued both of those offerings, and I've added new library support in the form of workshops in partnership with Careers Beyond Academia, offered in person to their patrons and clientele. So this is an example of one of those workshops. And so we started offering those in the fall as a pilot. And at that time, I offered 2 different workshops. I'm going to speak a little bit more later, but you can see here one of these on their Careers Beyond Academia site. And so this was part 2 about how to ace your interview. And you can see that as part of this workshop, I was showing students how to use Capital IQ and CB Insights. And since both of those required an account to be set up ahead of time, I asked the students to do that before they attended the workshop, just to make sure we had enough time to cover everything I wanted them to see. So now I want to talk a little bit about our partnership and benefits of partnering with career services, and some tips I have for questions you might want to ask. So just keep in mind, when you partner with career services, they can offer you a lot of really helpful information to make your consultations and workshops more relevant to the students and help improve attendance at your events, and just so you can offer the best possible, most tailored support. So just keep in mind, many university rankings and program rankings are directly tied to positive career outcomes like average starting salary or percentage of students who have a job within 6 months of graduation. So being able to partner with career services is a really great opportunity to tie your library work directly with these really important metrics. And so it's a really great opportunity. So I wanted to now offer you some questions that I think are really great to ask if you're able to work with career services and start a partnership yourself. So the first one that's really important to ask, you'd like to know what career services is offering already. For example, maybe they're offering networking advice or interviewing practice, that sort of thing. So it's really helpful to know what they're doing so we can refer as needed. As librarians, we're really best prepared to help students, for example, locate potential networking contacts, but the how to do the networking is often best left to career services, for example. So if you can understand what they're doing to help students, and when you can make those referrals as necessary. So for example, one thing that I always try to keep in mind is that those contacts that career services have with recruiters and people working at recruiting companies can be sort of delicate and maybe even political. And for example, here at Cornell, career services ask students anytime they want to make a networking contact and maybe ask for an informational interview, they ask those students to route that request through career services because they already have established points of contact within the company. And if a student were to do that on their own, they might disrupt that relationship. And so that's another reason why it's really important to kind of understand what career services is offering. The next 2 questions can really help you tailor your approach and your presentation to best meet student needs. So it's great to know where are students coming from, which departments. Are they more humanities based? Are they STEM students? Because your approach and what you can offer them might change based on what department they're coming from and what industry or sector they might be looking to enter. So if they're really truly just interested in nonprofits, then you might want to show them GuideStar instead of Capital IQ, for example. So having just a really nuanced understanding of the student needs can help you, tailor your workshops to best meet those needs. The next question would be, what is the recruitment cycle and what time of year are students interviewing? So if you are aware of when those interviews might be happening, you can time your workshops to that schedule, because it doesn't make sense. A lot of students aren't going to be motivated to learn more about preparing for an interview if their interview is 8 months away. So you want to catch them right at their point of need. So that's important information to have. And then finally, what's the best time of day to offer your workshops or consultations? So for example, here at Johnson, we librarians at the management library know that if we want to offer a workshop, it's got to be on either a Monday or Tuesday after 4 o'clock, because Wednesday is club meetings and Thursday is when they offer a Sage Social happy hour, and no student's going to come to your library workshop if you offer it during happy hour. So having that information about best time of day to offer workshops to make sure you maximize attendance is really helpful. And sometimes you're not going to know that unless you ask the right person, right? So I'm going to speak a little bit now about benefits of partnering with career services. So of course, going off of what we just discussed, if you partner with career services, you can have a better understanding of student needs, of course, and then you can tailor your approach accordingly. The next point I want to make is that you can improve your attendance from cross promotion. So if you're able to partner and get career services to cross promote your workshops, then you can improve your statistics and then sort of maximize your time and energy spent, and reach the greatest number of students possible. And similarly, you can improve the number of referrals you might get for career research consultations. And then finally, of course, like I mentioned before, those university metrics and career outcomes are so important. And so if you're able to partner and again, tailor your approach and reach the greatest number of students possible, hopefully you can improve those career outcomes and link your library work directly to those important metrics. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the content and what I covered in the workshops that I've done for Careers Beyond Academia. So I'm thinking about focusing on 3 different topics. So the first 2 are workshops that I offered in the fall. And then the third one is one that I haven't yet offered, but I hope to in the future. So I'm going to speak a little bit about each of these 3 topics in more detail in the following slides. So the first workshop I offered was about how to use our library resources to locate employers. So one thing to keep in mind when working with PhDs and postdocs is they have really specialized skills because of their really specialized education. And so just waiting for job ads to appear in a real reactive or passive approach to job searching might not be most effective for them because, by and large, these job postings are going to be for entry-level jobs. And if they're waiting for the job posting that speaks directly to this really particular skill they have, they might be waiting forever, right? So instead, when you have these really highly specialized skills, sometimes you want to find companies that best meet your needs. And then sometimes you may need to network your way into this position or have a conversation with somebody at that company rather than waiting for a job posting, for example. And so that's kind of how I explain this approach to using library tools to locate potential employers, because some grad students might not be familiar or understand why we're encouraging them to locate employers rather than look for job ads, right? But we have resources like screening tools and Capital IQ, for example, that can help you locate public and private companies. PitchBook is great for startups, or GuideStar can help students locate nonprofits they might want to work for. And so in that workshop, it's a real nuts and bolts exploration of how to use those particular tools. The next workshop that I offered was how to prepare for an interview. And in this presentation, it was a lot about how to anticipate questions a company might ask and how also to ask intelligent questions when it's your opportunity to ask questions in your interview. Because the more this interviewee or the student knows about a company, the better chance they can impress their interviewers and, gear their answers and their approach to, the company's particular situation. So I show them how to use our library resources to locate SWOT analyses, 10Ks, industry reports, news articles, and then explain a bit about how this information can be used in their interviews, because that's the first question they always ask is, you showed me this industry report, but what do I do with it? And so it's helpful to kind of provide the information I have, and then also, when appropriate, encourage them to approach career services about how they might use that information as well. And the final presentation, as I mentioned, this is not one I've offered for Careers Beyond Academia yet. I hope to in the future, but this is a presentation that some of our librarians have made before for the broader Cornell Career Services Department and their international student liaison. And so in this presentation, we would talk about how to locate potential visa sponsors using a site like My Visa Jobs, or using something like UniWorld, how to locate a multinational company that has an office in their home country or a country where they have a work authorization, and the target country where they'd like to work, with the reasoning being that perhaps it'd be easier to get hired on somewhere where they have a work authorization. And then once they're a known entity to the company, maybe then the company will be motivated to sponsor their visa and allow them to work in the country where they're actually interested in working. And so again, that's a workshop I hope to offer in the future. So now we'll talk a little bit about some insights I have and tips for introducing business information to non-business students, and some takeaways I have. So again, like I mentioned, these graduate students, by and large, aren't really familiar with business information. And another thing to keep in mind is so many of them, have gone straight through from their bachelor's degree to their PhD, and they might not be familiar with a non-academic career search in general. They may not have ever engaged with a career search off campus. And so it's important to be able to present the business information to them in an approachable way, and then apply it to how they're going to be using it in their job interviews, or when they're locating companies and that sort of thing. So here's some tips I have for kind of how to approach introducing business information to these students. So the first tip I have is to explain that information is more readily available from public companies rather than private ones. And that's because of the reporting burden that public companies have. So because shareholders can buy stocks in these companies, these shareholders have a right to know a little bit more about the company and its financial activity and that sort of thing. And so that's why the SEC requires these companies to file, for example, annual reports. And so if a student can understand that, they can see why it's a lot easier to find information about a public company rather than a private one. For example, a private company doesn't have any reporting burden, and they don't really have any incentive to share a lot of information about themselves, because a lot of it is sort of competitive intelligence or a trade secret that they don't have any incentive to share, right? And so that's why a student, if they are interviewing with a public company, they're going to be able to find out a lot more information. And another way this comes into practice in my workshops is I have a lot of students who, for example, are interested, they say, I know I want to work in my home state or this particular city, and I want to work for, maybe a big company with a lot of resources. So I really only want to look at companies with 100 or more employees, for example. And so some of them are thinking, when they use our screening tools, like the one in Capital IQ, that they want to put a limiter in the screener that says only display companies with 100 or more employees, for example. But one thing I always try to explain to those students is, when you do that, you eliminate the companies with no data too. So a private company might have more than 100 employees, but we might not have that data. And so if you're limiting your results to only the ones where we know they have 100 or more employees, you're actually going to really cut away some companies that really might be relevant to your needs. And so instead, I encourage those students, for example, to add number of employees as a display column in the results, so they can see the information when it's available, but not to limit their results by that factor. So that's kind of an example of how you can put this into practice, the difference between a public and a private company. And the next thing I like to explain is the difference between company information and industry information. And this is something we do with our MBA students as well. So for company information, like a SWOT analysis, for example, or an annual report, again, that's going to be most readily available for a public company. But even if your company's private and you can't find a SWOT analysis for them, you may be able to find an industry report that may have information about the industry as a whole. So it might not be geared so directly to the company they're interested in, but instead they might be able to get this broader industry information that they could then apply to the company that they're interviewing with. Next, I like to make sure to define a SWOT analysis and describe what it covers, because so many students that have never taken a business class, they might not be familiar with the format of these reports and what they cover. And I think this one is really worthwhile because these SWOT reports are so concise and useful that it is worthwhile for these students to become more familiar with them, because they can be really useful when you're preparing for an interview. So I've found in my experience, it's pretty easy to explain to them and they catch on really quickly. You know, we have strengths, S, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the strengths and weaknesses are qualities, you know, that are internal to the company that are going to impact their business success, while the opportunities and threats are external, you know, coming from the economic and business environment the company operates within, and that's going to also impact their ability to succeed. So if you just kind of differentiate, the strengths and weaknesses are internal and the opportunity and threats are external, often that's really all it takes, and they can catch on pretty quickly. And the final thing I really like to be sure I can explain to our non-business graduate students is industry classification systems like NAICS and SIC. Because when they're looking for their industry reports, or they're using a screening tool like Capital IQ to locate companies within a particular industry, they're going to need to understand this defined taxonomy of industries. You know, they may have an idea of what industry they're interested in, but if that's not how it's classified in NAICS, for example, they're going to have a hard time finding that information. Especially you'll see, you know, if you get a science STEM student, like they'll catch on to the idea of a taxonomy really quickly. But it's helpful if you have like a tree or one of the links to the NAICS lookup websites. It can be helpful to provide that for them. So finally, I'm going to wrap it up with some other general insights I have about planning a partnership or a workshop like this one. Again, I really like to link the resources and the business information to specific career goals, because so often, you know, I can show them how to locate the industry report, but the next question is always, so what? So it's really helpful if, you know, and it provides some motivation and some interest for these students if you're able to explain how they can use information in an industry report. If you understand any regulations or new laws and things that are going to be impacting an industry, you can relate that to a company's business activities, right? For example. So it's always really helpful to link what you're offering to a specific goal of theirs. The next one, again, is just to be really clear about what's best answered by career services. You know, really for the goodwill of the partnership. Of course, just like I would hate for somebody to show a student how to use a library resource when I think probably I'd be better suited to that. I wouldn't want to do that to anyone else. So just for the health of the partnership, it's great to be really clear about what's best sent over to career services. And again, I think I mentioned earlier about some of those delicate relationships that are maintained by career services, and they're really the best suited to kind of maintain those. And so again, deferring when needed. And then finally, encouraging students to access and download any resources they might need before they become alumni and lose access to library resources if needed. And of course, those graduate students are really good about asking that question. That's always like the last question I get in a workshop is like, will I have access to this when I graduate? I think so many of them are used to bouncing around from institution to institution. So they're used to losing that library resource, but it's useful to say, you know, if you're interested in the biomedical industry, go ahead and download this report now, because as much as we hope you get a job before you graduate, that might not happen. You might need that later. So be sure to download those reports so you can keep access for later. So that's really my presentation. Thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy now to take some questions.
Okay, while we are waiting for questions, I'd like to say I think I'd really like to take one of your workshops, Sarah. I've got a lot of grad students that I don't worry about, you know, the ones in the sciences, the ones with internships, the business students, but the ones I do worry about very much are the ones in Appalachian studies, liberal studies, the students who I've seen finish those master's degrees, don't necessarily want to go off to get doctorates, and are now sort of floundering. What do I do now? So I'm wondering, do you sort of soften your approach for humanities people so as to not scare them off by too much business?
I think in general, I try to adapt. Even the science students might not be, felt like they might not feel really welcomed by business information. I find, many people are intimidated by business information. So yeah, I do try to break it down in these digestible pieces. And again, not overwhelm them. I'm really always tempted. I enjoy business information. I'm tempted to just share everything, but I really try to focus on, exactly what's helpful to them in that moment in their career search and not try to over explain and just focus on those important pieces. Like I mentioned earlier, I find that really helpful too.
Roman is wondering if you've promoted soft skills training resources such as LinkedIn or anything similar in your activities.
That's a great question. I have not in the workshops. Sometimes in those one-on-one consultations, that's when students really feel comfortable, sharing what they feel like their weaknesses are, areas where they'd like to grow. And we are fortunate to have LinkedIn Learning. And so that's something I refer students to. And I've also found that the career services advisors are really great about recommending those resources as well. So sometimes usually when I get the students for the one-on-one consultations, they've already met with career services. And so they might have already been made aware of some of those resources too, but that's a great idea to bring that up in workshops as well. Thanks.
And Carmen is wondering what disciplines outside of business attend your workshops?
Yeah, so actually we don't have any business students at the Careers Beyond Academia workshops since we have a designated career services office within Johnson. But actually just the other day, I was working with a student who was in horticulture, and she was actually thinking about not completing the PhD, just graduating with a master's, and was looking at her options. But we get people in biomedical that might be interested in, pharmaceutical research and that sort of thing. But Cornell has so many different graduate programs, so we do kind of get a wide variety of students. But one thing that I really appreciate from Careers Beyond Academia is they have an intake survey where they do ask students what program they're in. And so ahead of time, I have access to that information. I can tailor my presentation if I know I have a lot of students coming, like from food science today. We get a lot of food science students as well.
Erica is wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how your offerings are received and promoted by academic departments and advisors, if at all, and especially those in the humanities and social sciences.
That's a great question. Kind of being in the management library, I don't have a lot of contact with the other departments. What I find is that these students are funneled to me directly from Careers Beyond Academia. So I have to imagine that they may discover Careers Beyond Academia based on recommendations from their advisors, but that's not something I know about. So generally they come to me after the contact with Careers Beyond Academia.
And is that a specific group, Careers Beyond Academia, that exists only at Cornell, or do you know of its existence at other places?
I don't think they're super common. I've seen them. I think Berkeley has one, for example, maybe Wake Forest. So it may be that other schools, that's a service offered through just the career services department. But I do think it's less common to have a specific office for non-faculty graduate students. They're not interested in faculty positions.
Okay, does anyone have one last question for Sarah? You can still ask her tomorrow because she's going to be here tomorrow.
I will.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I want to thank every one of our presenters today, our moderators, everyone who came and attended. We've had, I think, a very successful day one. I'm really looking forward to day two, and I will see all of you tomorrow.